What do you do when the sky falls silent? When the thunderous roar of a 500 horsepower engine, your very heartbeat in the thin, cold air, chokes and dies. At 22,000 feet above the frost-bitten German countryside, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler discovered the terrifying answer. Nothing. You do nothing but fall. He sat entombed in the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109, a metal coffin now gliding on the edge of oblivion, and he knew, with the chilling certainty of a condemned man, that he was about to die. The fuel gauge had been a liar for the last 10 minutes, but now it screamed the truth. Empty. The engine sputtered, coughed a final, rattling death throe, and then silence. A profound, deafening silence, broken only by the whisper of wind over his canopy. Below him stretched 50 miles of frozen earth, a patchwork quilt of fields and forests controlled utterly by the Americans. Behind him, his own airfield was a distant, unreachable dream. All around him, the vast, blue emptiness belonged to the enemy. Franz's gloved hands trembled on the control stick. It wasn't the cold, though the air at this altitude was a physical blade that cut to the bone. He trembled because he knew what came next. He had heard the stories, whispered in hushed tones in the mess halls. Every Luftwaffe pilot had. American fighters didn't just shoot you down. They were savages, barbarians. They strafed you in your parachute, a slow, macabre dance as you dangled helplessly. Target practice. That's what his commander had said. They show no mercy. If you bail out over Allied territory, you are as good as dead. Franz looked down. Somewhere in that snowy landscape were the men who had clawed their way across Europe, men who had seen their friends torn apart by German guns, men who had every reason on earth to hate him, to tear him from the sky with a vengeful fury. The engine was a corpse now, the propeller windmilling uselessly in the slipstream. A dead stick. He was nothing but a glider with a 30-foot wingspan, a testament to gravity's cold embrace. He could see it now, an American airfield ahead. A captured Luftwaffe base, now bristling with the lean, predatory shapes of American aircraft. He had maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes before he had to choose between bailing out into a hail of bullets or attempting a forced landing that would surely end in a fiery wreck or capture. He thought of his mother and younger sister in Bavaria. They would get the telegram, missing in action. They would never know. Burned alive? Shot from his chute? Beaten to death by angry GIs? The not knowing would be its own kind of torture. Then, he saw them. 2 silver specks in his mirror, glinting like shards of glass. Closing fast. P-51 Mustangs. The angels of death, the most lethal aircraft in the European theater. Franz's mouth went dry as dust. This was it. A quick, violent end. At least it would be quick. But what happened next would not just save his life. It would shatter his entire world. The lead Mustang didn't open fire. It slid alongside his dying Messerschmitt, impossibly, dangerously close, perhaps 50 feet off his wingtip. Through the crystal-clear canopy, Franz could see the pilot's face. An American. Young, probably his own age, mid-20s. He wore no oxygen mask, his features unobscured. And he wasn't looking at his gun sight, he was looking at Franz. Direct, unwavering eye contact across the abyss of war. Franz's heart hammered against his ribs. A cruel game? Was he toying with him? Then the American did something utterly incomprehensible. He gestured, pointing down, not aggressively, but helpfully, pointing toward the airfield below. The second Mustang took up position on Franz's other wing, boxing him in. A silver-winged cage. His Messerschmitt, his once proud eagle, was now a wounded sparrow, gliding down through 18,000 feet, bleeding altitude with every passing second. no power, no options, no escape. The lead American pilot pointed down again, more insistently this time. Then he made another gesture, a flat-palmed pushing motion. Slow down. Land. Franz's mind was a maelstrom of confusion. They were helping him? Escorting him? It couldn't be. Nothing in his training, nothing in the hate-filled propaganda films, nothing his commanders had ever told him had prepared him for this. This was a lie. It had to be a lie. His altimeter unwound through 15,000 feet. The airfield was directly ahead now, a hornet's nest of the enemy. He could see the runways, the rows of parked aircraft, the tiny figures of men moving on the flight line. To land there meant capture. A prisoner of war. Every horror story screamed in his mind. Torture, summary executions, labor camps where men were worked to death. Asterisk, better to die in combat than to surrender to the Americans. Asterisk, his commandant had bellowed, but he was out of choices. The ground was rushing up to meet him. And still, the Americans stayed with him, one on each wing, like guardian angels escorting him through the valley of death. 10,000 feet. 8,000. 5,000. Franz's hands were slick with sweat inside his leather gloves. He waited, tensed, for the inevitable roar of .50 caliber machine guns that would tear his world apart. It never came. At 3,000 feet, the lead Mustang's pilot gave him a final look, then rocked his wings, a pilot's salute. He peeled off, banking sharply away, giving Franz the room he needed. The second Mustang lingered a moment longer, a silent shepherd guiding a lost sheep, before it too climbed away into the blue. Alone now, Franz wrestled with the controls. He lowered his landing gear manually, the crank protesting with a groan. The hydraulics were useless. The wheels locked down with a reassuring solid thunk. He lined up with the runway, his entire being focused, using every ounce of his skill to stretch the glide, to make the dead aircraft kiss the earth gently. His wheels touched concrete. A bounce, a jarring shudder, and then he was rolling. No brakes, no power. The plane rolled and rolled, an eternity of rumbling concrete, finally coasting to a stop at the far end of the runway. For a long moment, Franz just sat there, hands welded to the control stick, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The silence was absolute, and then he saw them. Jeeps, bristling with antennas and men, racing toward him across the airfield. American soldiers. This was it, the moment of capture. A flash of instinct told him to reach for his sidearm, to die a German officer's death. But something held him back, the memory of that American pilot's eyes, the impossible gesture of mercy. They had saved his life. Franz Stigler unbuckled his harness, pushed open the heavy canopy, and slowly, deliberately, raised his hands. The first American soldier to reach the crippled Messerschmitt was a sergeant, his face weathered and tired. He clambered onto the wing, pistol drawn, but the barrel was pointed down, at the metal skin, not at Franz. "Out," the sergeant said in English. Then, in surprisingly clear, if broken, German, "Raus, langsam." Slowly. Franz climbed out of the cockpit, his legs trembling so violently he could barely stand. The adrenaline of 3 hours of flight and the sheer shock of the last 10 minutes had left him utterly drained. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. He stood on the wing, hands raised, a defeated enemy on display, waiting for the blow, the shove, the shouted order. The sergeant holstered his pistol. He reached out a hand and steadied Franz as he stepped down from the wing. "Easy there, buddy," he said, his voice startlingly calm. "You okay? Verletzt? Injured?" Franz stared at him, dumbfounded. The American was checking if he was hurt. Genuine concern, not malice, was in his voice. 9. Franz managed to croak. "Not injured. Good. Come on, then." The sergeant gestured toward the jeep. Not roughly, but casually, as if Franz were a visiting dignitary who'd had some engine trouble, not an enemy who, just hours before, might have been trying to kill his countrymen. In the jeep, Franz sat squeezed between two GIs. Neither man pointed a weapon at him. They were just men. Young men in olive drab uniforms, smelling of cigarette smoke, engine oil, and stale army coffee. One of them silently held out a canteen. Water. Franz hesitated for a fraction of a second, the years of propaganda whispering warnings in his ear. Poison? A trick? But thirst was a more powerful master. His throat was a desert. He took the canteen, the cold metal, a shock against his grimy glove, and drank. The water was clean and achingly cold, and it was quite possibly the most wonderful thing he had ever tasted. "Donkey," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. The soldier on his right grinned, a flash of white teeth in a young, unshaven face. "You're welcome, pal." At the base operations building, they led him from the biting March cold into a room filled with impossible warmth. An intelligence officer was waiting. Captain James Mitchell. A man with thinning hair and glasses who looked more like a college professor than a soldier. He spoke fluent academic German. "Sit down," Mitchell said, gesturing to a chair. Not a hard wooden stool in a bare interrogation cell, but a padded office chair. On the desk between them sat a percolator, bubbling away. The rich, dark aroma of real coffee filled the air, so potent it made Franz's head spin. "You want some?" Mitchell asked, already reaching for a mug. Franz could only nod, mute. Mitchell handed him the steaming mug. Hot. Black. And on the saucer, 2 perfect white cubes. Sugar. Real sugar. Franz hadn't seen real sugar in months. Germany was starving, a nation living on ersatz coffee and black bread. And here, in the heart of the enemy's war machine, they were giving sugar to a prisoner. "Those were good pilots who brought you in," Mitchell said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. "Captain Joe Henderson and Lieutenant Charlie Brown, 357th Fighter Group. They saw your engine was out. Figured you might want to live through the day." Franz took a sip of the coffee. It burned his tongue, but he didn't care. The warmth spread through him, a thawing of a deep internal ice. Why? The word escaped his lips before he could stop it. Mitchell looked at him, his expression one of genuine curiosity. "Why what? Why? Why didn't they shoot me down? Why did they help me?" Captain Mitchell leaned back in his chair and looked at Franz over the rim of his glasses, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "Because you were defenseless," he said simply. "What kind of men do you think we are?" Over the next hour, and the weeks that followed, Franz Stigler's entire reality, the world built for him by years of Nazi ideology, began to crumble. They took him to the POW holding area. It wasn't a cage or a barbed wire pen. It was a converted barracks building with wooden bunks, coarse but clean wool blankets, and a pot-bellied stove that radiated a blessed, constant heat. There were a dozen other German prisoners there, all airmen, all recently captured. On their faces, Franz saw the same stunned, disoriented expression he felt on his own. Later that day, an American medic came by. Despite Franz's insistence that he was fine, the medic examined him anyway. He checked his blood pressure, shone a light in his eyes, listened to his heart with a stethoscope. "You're dehydrated," the medic said, his words relayed by another prisoner who spoke some English. "And you've got some frostbite starting on your fingers. We'll get you fixed up." They gave him a greasy ointment for his hands, another blanket, and a package of American K rations. Inside was canned meat, crackers, a small bar of chocolate, and 4 cigarettes. The chocolate. It was dark and rich, and as it melted on his tongue, it tasted of a forgotten time. It tasted like childhood, before the war. Franz ate it slowly, piece by piece, savoring a flavor he thought he might never taste again. That evening, a visitor arrived. It was Captain Henderson, the American pilot, the man who had held his life in his hands and given it back. He came not as a captor, but as a colleague. He brought more cigarettes and a thermos of hot soup, passed through the interpreter. "Thought you might be hungry," Henderson said. He paused, then added, "That was some damned fine flying, by the way. A dead stick landing in a 109 on an unfamiliar runway. Impressive." Franz was speechless. An enemy ace was complimenting his airmanship. They were men trained for the singular purpose of killing one another, yet here they sat, sharing a moment of mutual professional respect. Henderson pulled a worn photograph from his wallet and passed it to Franz. A smiling woman and 2 small children squinting in the sun. "My wife, Betty, and my kids," he said, his voice softening. "Donna's 5. Little Joe just turned 3. He looked at Franz. "You got family?" Franz nodded slowly, the image of his mother's worried face flashing in his mind. "My mother, my sister." "They'll be glad to know you made it down safe," Henderson said. "The Red Cross will notify them. You're a POW. Better than missing in action, right?" They sat in a profound silence for a moment. 2 fathers, 2 sons, 2 pilots on opposite sides of a cataclysm, connected by a picture of a family. "Listen," Henderson said finally, his tone serious. "I know what they told you about us, that we torture prisoners, shoot them, all that garbage. But that's not who we are. You're going to be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You'll get medical care, food, and when this war is over, and it will be over soon, you will go home." In that moment, something inside Franz didn't just crack, it shattered. "In Germany," he said, struggling with the broken English he knew, "they tell us Americans are animals." Henderson let out a short, soft laugh, not unkind. "Yeah, well, they told us you guys eat babies for breakfast. Propaganda is a hell of a thing, isn't it?" In the temporary POW camp, Franz's re-education continued, not through lectures, but through small, relentless acts of decency. The food was simple military fare, K rations, powdered eggs, canned stew, but it was consistent, the same food the American guards ate. When Red Cross parcels arrived, a guard announced that prisoners would get first pick: chocolate, coffee, soap, writing paper, miracles of civilian life. The medical care was unwavering. A young Luftwaffe pilot named Werner, who had been shot in the leg, was treated by American doctors with the same urgency as their own wounded. Sulfa drugs to prevent infection, clean bandages, an operation to remove the shrapnel. Werner would walk with a limp, but he would walk. Franz knew that in a German camp for Soviet prisoners, Werner would have lost the leg, if not his life. He watched the guards, waiting for the facade to drop, for the cruelty he'd been promised to emerge. It never did. They were professional, often bored, sometimes even friendly. A young guard from Nebraska named Tommy, a farm boy with a wide grin, spent an afternoon trying to explain the rules of baseball to Franz, who in turn taught Tommy some choice German curse words. They laughed together, a German pilot and an American GI, in the spring of 1945. One afternoon, music drifted across the compound. American music. A radio was playing Glenn Miller's "In the Mood." Franz found himself tapping his foot to the forbidden rhythm. He had loved swing music before the Nazis banned it as degenerate. A guard noticed. "You like swing?" he asked. Franz nodded. "Before the war," the guard grinned. "No kidding?" "Hold on." He returned a few minutes later with a portable record player and a stack of 78s. Benny Goodman. Duke Ellington. That night, in the common room of a POW barracks in Germany, A small group of German prisoners and their American guards sat together, listening to jazz, the shared rhythm, a temporary bridge across an ocean of blood and ideology. The war wasn't over, but in that moment they were just men who liked music. A new prisoner arrived, a pilot named Klaus, terribly burned when his plane was shot down. He was bitter, full of undiluted Nazi vitriol. "They're just fattening us up to slaughter us later," he spat in German. "You are a fool to trust them." Franz just shook his head. "No, Klaus, you have been brainwashed." Klaus didn't believe him. Not until the American doctors spent weeks treating his agonizing burns, changing his dressings, giving him precious morphine for the pain. Not until a young nurse sat with him through the night, talking to him in broken German to distract him from his suffering. Slowly, Klaus's fortress of hate crumbled from within, undermined by simple, unexpected kindness. This treatment wasn't an accident, or the kindness of a few good men. It was policy. General Eisenhower had issued a clear directive. All prisoners would be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. Period. This wasn't because the Germans always reciprocated. They often did not, especially on the Eastern Front. It was because the Americans believed in a code that stood above the raw brutality of war. This was strategic empathy. American leadership understood that the way you treat a defeated enemy determines the kind of peace you can build. Every German POW who went home with a story of fair treatment was an ambassador against the poison of Nazism, a brick in the foundation of a new, democratic Germany. The numbers are stark. Of the roughly 380,000 German POWs held in the United States, the survival rate was over 99%. For Soviet prisoners in German camps, it was less than 40%. It wasn't about being soft. It was about being smart. It was about winning the peace, not just the war. A few days before the final surrender, Captain Mitchell gathered the prisoners. "The war is almost over," he said in his crisp German. "You will be going home. But Germany will need rebuilding. It will need men who understand the Nazi way was a dead end, men who can help build something better. I hope you will be those men." Franz Stigler was repatriated in August 1945. He found a Germany of ghosts and rubble. His hometown was a ruin, but his mother and sister were alive. He found work, first as a laborer, then, as the nation rebuilt, he returned to the skies, flying for the new Lufthansa. He married, had a daughter, and in 1961 immigrated to Canada, building a new life. But he never, ever forgot. For decades, he searched for the American pilot who had shown him mercy. He wrote to veterans, associations, scoured records, chasing a ghost from his past. Finally, in 1989, he found him, Charlie Brown, not Joe Henderson as the initial reports mistakenly said, a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel living in Florida. They arranged to meet. When Franz, now a gray-haired grandfather, saw Charlie in the airport terminal, he began to weep. They embraced. Two old men, former enemies, now brothers. "Thank you," Franz said, his voice thick with the emotion of 44 years. "Thank you for saving my life." Charlie, modest to the end, just smiled. It was the right thing to do. They remained inseparable friends until Charlie's death in 2008. Franz spoke at his funeral. The story of Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown is not just a heartwarming anecdote. It is a lesson in the long-term strategic power of decency. By treating prisoners humanely, America didn't just uphold an ideal. It laid the groundwork for the post-war world. The Marshall Plan, the rebuilding of Western Europe, only worked because a generation of Germans, men like Franz, were willing to believe that America could be a partner, not just a conqueror. Their own experiences, even as prisoners, had shown them that American actions contradicted Nazi propaganda. West Germany became a cornerstone of NATO, a democratic ally against the Soviet Union. The Axis powers of 1945 became the core of the Western Alliance. That transformation was not an accident. It was born in moments like the one at 22,000 feet. It was forged in the warmth of a cup of coffee, in the shared rhythm of a jazz record, in the simple, profound question, what kind of men do you think we are? Before his own death, Franz returned to that old German airfield. It was a peaceful civilian airport now. He stood on the edge of the runway where he had landed on the wings of a miracle. "I died that day," he said quietly to his daughter. "The man who believed the lies, who hated without knowing why, he died, and I was reborn as someone who understood that our common humanity is stronger than any flag or uniform." That choice, to see a human being instead of an enemy, is what separates civilization from barbarism. It is a choice that not only saves a life, but can, in time, change the world.
Thank you for listening. Please share your thoughts, like this video if you found it helpful, and subscribe for more.